Hello, everyone. I am Michael Munson with Forge. Thank you for joining us today for the Stopping It Where It Starts, Disrupting the Trans Non-Binary Pathway in Childhood virtual training. Laurie Cook-Daniels, today's other presenter, and I are happy that you're joining us today for this learning journey as we delve into territory that may be new to some and a bit more familiar to others. We'd like to start by thanking our funder. We are funded in part by the Victims of Crime Act, who is supporting this and the series of 6 webinars that we will be doing this December 2020. Some of you have been on prior Forge trainings, webinars, or in-person trainings, and we know that sometimes content is difficult and challenging, and we encourage everybody to take care of yourself. We'll be talking about children and youth today, so it may be a little bit more sensitive to some than others. So we know that this work can be really difficult, and we encourage you to take a moment if you need to stop the recording or do what you need to do to make sure that you are okay so that you can take in this information and better serve your clients. So we wanted to take just a moment to share with you who we are and a little bit about who Forge is. Again, I am Michael Munson, Forge's Executive Director and co-founder, and I'll be playing a small role in today's training. My colleague, Laurie Cook-Daniels, Forge's Policy and Program Director, will be your primary host and facilitator today. Forge is a national transgender organization that is 100% funded to do anti-violence work. We are national in scope, so we cover the whole 50 states and territories. And we also have some work that we do locally in Wisconsin, where many of our staff are based. We were founded in 1994, so we are 26 years old, almost 27 years old right now. And we work both directly with trans and non-binary survivors and loved ones, so that's about 25% of our work. And the remaining 75% of our work is with victim service providers, so folks like you all that are watching. And that work is training and technical assistance. We have 2 foundational principles that guide our work. One is about being trauma-informed, and as we are trauma-informed with our clients and the trans folks that we work with, we also care about being trauma-informed with you as victim service providers. The second foundational principle is to be empowerment-based. So, of course, many of us know that when we work with survivors, we want to empower the survivors that we work with. But we also care at Forge to make sure that we empower you as victim service providers and allied professionals. We want to make sure that you are uplifted and that you feel empowered to do the good work that you do and also be trans-informed and trans-inclusive. So before we dive in, I wanted to make sure that everybody has the awareness of where we are in social media. It's the way that we can connect with you and you can connect with us, where we share new resources and where you can hear about what's happening in terms of other webinars, other trainings, other publications. So you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, which we are trying to get better at, and many of our videos are housed on YouTube like this one is. Next slide, please. So our agenda for today, we are going to talk about the following topics. Some of the facts about trans and non-binary youth. We'll talk about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. We'll look at trans-specific ACEs. We'll then talk about pathways to victimization and how the things we talk about lead to polyvictimization. And then we'll end with what you can do to help address the problems we'll be talking about. So the population of trans and non-binary youth is growing rapidly. 2 of our most recent studies from 2017 found that 7.7% or 1.8% of teens identified as trans. One study found that another 1.6% of teenagers were in the study were not sure if they were trans, which all adds up to 3.4%. A 2018 study found that nearly 3% of Minnesota teens identified as trans. That's not all. A 2017 Harris poll found that 12% of millennials, people aged 18 to 34, identified as transgender or gender nonconforming. Whatever the real percentage is, the trend is obvious. A growing proportion of the population, particularly young people, identify as trans or non-binary. One of the most obvious facts that jump out at anyone who is working on violence and trauma against trans and non-binary folks is that as a group, we experience higher and sometimes, in some cases, much higher rates of sexual violence, intimate partner violence, hate crimes, mental health problems, especially depression, anxiety, and suicidality, and substance use issues, to name just a top few issues. One of the reasons that our rates are higher is a phenomenon that's well known among those who work with crime victims. Once someone has been victimized in any way, they are more likely to be victimized again. This is what we tend to call polyvictimization. Even though polyvictimization happens to crime victim populations across the board, Forge has been interested in looking at the particular pathways that lead to those higher than usual victimization rates among trans and non-binary folks. The first thing that we noticed when we started investigating this issue was the higher victimization rates that start in childhood. A 2017 Youth Risk Behavior Survey found that trans and non-binary high schoolers were 3 times more likely to experience sexual abuse in the past 12 months. Were 3.6 times more likely to feel unsafe at school in the past 30 days, and were nearly 5 times as likely to be threatened or injured with a weapon at school. Probably as a result, the trans and non-binary high schools are far more likely to attempt suicide in the past year, around 35% of trans and non-binary youth, compared to 7% of other youth. Seriously consider suicide in the past year, so 44% of trans and non-binary youth, compared to 16% of other youth. And those data are from the Trevor Project research in February of 2019. And I'm going to turn things back over to Laurie to talk about ACEs.
Thank you, Michael. Abuse and trauma in childhood has far more lifelong effects than most people understand. A long-running study that is backed by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, called the Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACE study, has clearly demonstrated that childhood problems lead to lifelong effects. This study began in the 1990s and has since been replicated on tens of thousands of respondents. Originally, the study looked at 10 types of adverse childhood events: physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, and parental or household issues, mental illness, mother treated violently. I'll note that this study began before many people were willing to admit that fathers might also be abused, divorce, incarceration of a parent or relative, and substance abuse by a parent or other adult household member. The way the study was designed, adults were given 1 point for each type of ACE they had experienced as a child, leading to scores ranging from 0, the person had none of the designated adverse childhood experiences, to 10, the person had experienced them all. Researchers then looked at the health records for these adults. The following health risk outcomes have been measured against people's ACEs scores. Behavioral risk outcomes, such as lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, missed work, were measured. And so were physical and mental health outcomes, such as severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, sexually transmitted diseases or infections, heart disease, cancer, stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and even broken bones. What they found was a remarkable and remarkably consistent pattern. The more ACEs someone had scored, the more likely they were to experience those risk factors and diseases. For example, here's a chart on how ACEs relate to adult alcoholism. For those who have 0 ACEs, about 3% will become alcoholic. If you have 1 ACE, your risk goes up to about 5%. 2 ACEs and your risk goes up to 10%. 3 ACEs, your risk goes to 11%. And if you have 4 or more ACEs, your risk of becoming an alcoholic goes up to 16%. This is just a representative chart. Nearly all measured health problems have the same stepwise progression. The more ACEs you experience as a child, the higher your risk for the various adverse health outcomes as an adult. Here's how the researchers think the problems develop. Children who have adverse childhood experiences need to spend time and energy focusing on surviving whatever bad things they are experiencing. As a result, they miss out on some of the optimal social, emotional, and cognitive development that children who are not distracted by trauma experience. These social, emotional, and cognitive impairments lead to social problems. Children may withdraw, not be good at making friends, fail at school, and experience other kinds of problems. Those social problems lead to the adoption of health risk behaviors, such as substance use, sexual risk-taking, overeating, and other behaviors that are how many of us try to cope with difficult emotions. Those health risk behaviors, in turn, lead to disease, disability, and even more social problems, such as being arrested for driving under the influence or getting involved in domestic violence or a street fight. And all of those, in turn, lead to earlier deaths, which has also been amply documented by the various ACE studies that have happened. The leading ACE study researcher, Dr. Vincent Felitti, has even said ACEs are, quote, the most important determinant of the health and well-being of our nation, end quote. What is important to note is that ACEs occur in all races, genders, communities, identities, etc. Overall, between 55 and 62% of the US population have experienced at least one category of ACE, and between 13 and 17% of the population have an ACE score of 4 or more. Michael will now go back and talk about some trans-specific ACEs.
Thanks, Laurie. So like Laurie said, we're going to talk about some trans-specific ACEs because we know that the ACE study doesn't cover some of the community-specific ACEs that we'll share today. Commentators have pointed out that it doesn't take into account poverty or racism, for example. We believe the same is true of trans and non-binary communities. We have unique adverse childhood experiences that may help explain our health disparity and higher rates of polyvictimization. We're going to briefly look at 8 of those possibilities. So the first one is on ACEs and bullying. An estimated 1 in 3 US students are bullied at school. In comparison, 65 to 85% of LGBTQ students experience harassment or bullying at school. The types of bullying range from being threatened or injured with a weapon, being sexually harassed, being physically assaulted. Relational aggression, being deliberately excluded or left out by other students or having rumors spread about them, is extremely common. This kind of bullying can happen at home, in the neighborhood, or on the streets as well. Trans and non-binary students have some unique issues at school. 60% have been forced to use a bathroom or locker room that doesn't align with or doesn't match their gender identity or presentation. 50% are called by an incorrect name, and 28% are not allowed to wear the clothes that they prefer and that align with their gender identity.
I have encountered verbal harassment in the bathroom and people peeping into the stalls saying, "Look, it's a girl," and other similar incidents that made me feel unsafe.
Some people wonder if these sorts of experiences, while perhaps annoying, are really problematic. Well, yes, they are. One study found that schools that force trans and non-binary students to use the wrong bathroom, the sexual assault rate for trans and non-binary students was 25.9%. The comparison rates are 15% for non-trans girls and 4% for non-trans boys. The second trans-specific ACE is denial of identity. Unfortunately, parenting doesn't come with an instruction manual. Many parents don't know what to do when their child is different from what they expected. To try to protect their children from further harm, some parents actively push against their child's identity, denying their child's ability to self-define and express themselves in their gender, in their truest form. What this means for trans youth is that they're either staying at home and living in an environment where they cannot be accepted for who they are, or they leave home voluntarily or not voluntarily in hopes of being able to live in congruence with their gender. Well-meaning parents use phrases like, "it's just a phase," or "he'll grow out of it," or "how could she possibly know," or "he's just confused." They may also discourage the adolescent or teen or child from talking about their trans or non-binary identity. They may even try to keep children from attending family events so that their trans identity doesn't become known. We want to make two things clear at the outset. As we noted at the beginning, something bad is happening in some families with LGBTQ children, as indicated by the fact that LGBTQ youth are more likely to experience various types of abuse than are non-LGBTQ youth in the same families. At the same time, it's probably that most families are not intentionally abusive to their LGBTQ children. Instead, they may try to change their child's sexual orientation or gender identity to help their children have a good life, to be safe, and to be accepted. Studies have shown that most parents are ambivalent when they learn that they have an LGBTQ child, at least at first. The problem with these behaviors is that even though the parents are trying to do the right things by their children, research shows that children perceive these behaviors as rejection. We do not yet have studies on how trans kids react to family rejection, but we do have studies from the Family Acceptance Project of what happens to LGBTQ youth who feel rejected. LGBTQ youth who experience highly rejecting behaviors are 8.4 times more likely to report having attempted suicide, 5.9 times more likely to report high levels of depression, 3.4 times more likely to use drugs that are considered illegal, and 3.4 times more likely to engage in unsafe sex than youth who are not at all or only a little rejected by their caregivers or parents.
Here's a real-life example of a parent who now regrets how they responded to their trans child. When my daughter was little, I spent so much time fussing over how she looked. I should have been concerned about how she felt. We didn't know about transgender, but I know how sad and depressed she got right before middle school. The school helped us find a counselor, and that's when we found out how hopeless she felt. I wanted to make sure she wasn't rejected by others, but instead I was the one who was rejecting her. I'm so grateful I could change things before it was too late.
An organized form of denial of identity that some parents use is conversion therapy, which is a religious or therapeutic, in big quotes, attempt to change someone's sexual orientation and or their gender identity or expression. About 700,000 LGBT Americans have been subjected to conversion therapy. Not only do these programs not work, they have a wide range of negative consequences. In addition to the informal rejections LGBTQ youth may feel from their parents or families, there is conversion therapy. This might be faith-based, therapist-led, or advocacy group-led. What it is a program that attempts to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity, like we mentioned on the last slide. Conversion therapy has been going on for decades. Early on, it included institutionalization, castration, and electric shock therapy. Nowadays, it's more likely to include things like training to conform to societal gender norms, teaching heterosexual dating norms, using hypnosis to redirect desires, and sometimes efforts to make the child or youth turn against family members under the theory that those family members caused the LGBTQ identity. Thank you, Lurie. The American Psychological Association has noted that there are many possible consequences of conversion therapy. Survivors of conversion therapy may have lower self-esteem, may feel inauthentic, and lose their faith. They may also have experiences where they increase their self-hatred, their substance use might increase, they have increased engagement in high-risk behaviors around sex. They might blame themselves or feel dehumanized. They have increased, maybe they have increased anger, they might feel betrayal, they might feel confused and hopeless, and withdraw from society, and even have increased suicidality, like we've mentioned. The third trans-specific ACE is leaving home as a teenager. We do not know precisely how many trans and non-binary youth are rejected by their parents or leave home due to abuse or violence in the home. But we do know that 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ. The chart on the screen indicates the top 3 reasons for LGBT youth homelessness, and those include parental rejection, which is at 69%, abuse within family, so physical or emotional or sexual abuse, that's also at 69%, or aggression or violence in the family, and that's at 62%. So youth who are kicked out of their homes, which as you can see are often violent, are then out on the streets, which is filled with violence and heightened risk of harm. So the fourth ACE is around police misconduct. So since many trans youth are homeless or survive through street economies, many have unwanted contact with police. Although some police are extremely well trained and respectful, many are abusive to youth in general and to trans youth in particular. People who are surviving through sex work or other street economies may have more direct contact with police, which might result in an increased opportunity for inappropriate or abusive police behavior. Trans people have reported high rates of verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse from law enforcement. Trans communities in places like New Orleans, District of Columbia, and New York have tried to make a difference in how police and trans people interact, trying to shift things like stop and frisk laws, decriminalizing sex work, and giving space to homeless youth. Breakout is a youth-led organization in New Orleans, which is specifically dedicated to ending the criminalization of LGBTQ youth, with a very heavy focus on trans youth. Trans people can be exposed to dozens of microaggressions every day. Microaggressions are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate derogatory or negative slights and insults, or even some hostility towards a group of people. These words and actions establish, reflect, and reinforce the dominant paradigm, erasing the experiences and realities of a minority. Each event, observation, and experience is not necessarily particularly striking in and of itself. Often they are never meant to cause harm. They're just acts done with little conscious awareness of their meanings or effects. Instead, the gradual buildup throughout a childhood or over a lifetime is what defines the pain, marginalization, and often fear that many trans people feel. Number 6 ACE is talking about minority stress. So minority stress is the result of observable incidents, vigilant for future incidents, and a person's decision that the incident is related to that person's minority status. As a result, they internalize this process as stress. Living with minority stress on a daily basis can and does have negative health implications, both physical and emotional. The 7th Trans-Pacific ACE is around legislated discrimination. In recent years, we've seen public debates and even referenda on trans people's rights. We know from research that when your rights are subjected to your neighbor's votes, the impact is particularly painful. We all know that there's transphobia, anti-Semitism, racism, and all of those isms, but it feels very different to be in a grocery store looking around at your neighbors and knowing that whatever percentage of actually voted, that you shouldn't have the rights that they have. Because so many of these battles have focused on school children, they've been especially affected. The policy fights can interrupt their learning experience and cause them to be afraid to be themselves anywhere. Finally, the 8th ACE that we're going to talk about that's trans-specific is culture-wide discrimination against trans people. And that we see is on an upswing. The image on the right is of Leila Alcorn, who ended her suicide note by saying, "Fix society, please." There is seemingly an endless list of ways in which the most recent administration attacked and discriminated against trans and non-binary people. We share just one slide of many, many attacks. Cabinet members or former cabinet members have called trans people abominations or abnormal. They have said things like, "A leopard can't change its spots," or "being trans doesn't make any sense." They've also alleged that trans people are the height of absurdity. So these are hard things to take in, and Lorie's going to talk next about the pathways to polyvictimization.
Thank you, Michael. We have touched on some of the ways in which adverse childhood experiences lead to polyvictimization, but let's explore those a little more. All of these adverse childhood experiences, trans-related or not, can lead to further victimization. As a result of abuse, trans and non-binary youth may experience mental health issues, which can make them more vulnerable to abuse by others and to self-abuse. Trans and non-binary youth may drop out of school before obtaining their diploma, making their employment prospects much poorer. Again, we do not know precisely how many trans youth are in the juvenile justice system, but we do know that an estimated 15% of the juvenile justice population is LGBTQ, despite LGBTQ youth not making up that high of a percentage of the overall youth population. This higher percentage is likely due to the harsher school discipline LGBTQ youth experience, plus factors such as homelessness, which tends to lead to more contact with law enforcement, and the fact that once a youth has been arrested, it usually takes a parent to help get them out. Parents of LGBTQ youth may not be willing to do that for their arrested child. We've already mentioned homelessness as a risk factor. All these things together tend to lead to trans and non-binary youth surviving through the underground economy, such as trading sex for money or housing. About 20% of trans people have engaged in the underground economy at some point in their lifetime. Working in the underground economy tends to increase a youth's exposure to police and the criminal justice system, sexual assault, intimate partner violence, public harassment, and being attacked with a gun. All of these are pathways to LGBTQ youth and then adult higher victimization rates. Another set of victimization risk factors are psychological, in which a person's beliefs set them up for not recognizing when they are being abused and or deciding that being abused is better than any available alternatives. Some of the myths that trans and non-binary people hear about that can set them up for victimization include: no one will ever love you, which can lead a trans or non-binary person to stay with an abusive partner because that's better than being alone. It's you who are a threat to other people. The current widespread myth that says trans people sexually assault people in bathrooms can be confusing and debilitating to those who have been abused. If I'm the threat, then what do you call what happened to me? General disrespect and denigration of trans and non-binary people's gender identities can undermine their sense of being a worthy person who does not deserve abuse. The widespread belief that defines domestic violence and or sexual assault as only occurring when a man attacks a woman can make it very difficult for trans and non-binary people to understand the abuse that is happening to them and take steps to get out of it. The final psychological issue we'll mention is that too often trans and non-binary youth can point to almost no visible and happy trans adults. This makes it harder to believe you deserve a good life. The study we mentioned earlier that found that trans and non-binary students are more at risk for sexual assault if they are forced to use the wrong bathroom at school suggested 3 ways this could be increasing victimization. 1, the facilities they are forced to use are less safe for them, perhaps because they don't appear to belong there. The restriction may out them as transgender and therefore increase the likelihood of bias-related victimization. And 3, the restriction may reflect an overall hostile environment for gender minority youth. The picture we've just painted is, we admit, a dark one. We've talked about the many ways in which trans and non-binary youth can be set up for a lifetime of victimization. The good news is that this pathway can be disrupted by just one concerned adult. In this last section, we're going to talk about the many ways that anyone can make a difference. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has studied child abuse prevention as a public health issue. They've concluded that an effective intervention is providing safe, stable, and nurturing relationships, or SSNR. Safe relationships provide a welcome respite for a child or youth that is used to neglect and or violence. A stable relationship helps an abused child or youth experience the opposite of chaos and unpredictability. A nurturing relationship can counter hostility and rejection. Too often people think, but I'm only one person. What good can I do? In 2019, the Trevor Project surveyed LGBTQ youth and found that those youth who said they had at least one supportive adult in their life were 40% less likely to attempt suicide. So what specifically can you do? We have a long list of suggestions for you. Because victimization and rejection take such a toll on self-esteem, two of the key needs trans and non-binary youth have is to feel like they matter and to feel hopeful about their future. First role is to always use their stated name and pronoun. Next steps can include expressing affection toward a trans or non-binary child or youth, saying something to them or within their earshot about your expectations for their happy and successful future, and including them in family or group activities. All of these can help counter negative messages and provide hope for the future. How do these actions help? A study of trans and non-binary youth asked them what they needed and wanted from adults and summarized the answers this way. They emphasized the importance of being seen and validated as their gender identities as a very specific first step, a step which the youth defined as acceptance. Being accepted means to feel love and compassion from the other person, but very specifically also means that people respect their dignity as humans, including their identified gender. Family members may forbid trans kids to bring other trans kids home, and school doesn't always feel like a safe gathering place either. So if you know of or can create an event, such as a gardening party, a trip to the zoo, or volunteering at a food pantry, at which trans youth can meet up, do so. Most youth have people like me as role models at home, but most trans and non-binary kids do not have a family member who is also trans or non-binary. That means connecting trans and non-binary youth with adult role models and online resources is critical to help them shore up their self-esteem and belief in a positive future. Do not assume the youth already has these resources. They may, but a 2018 GLSEN report found that most students did not have access to LGBTQ-related topics in their school library, through the internet on school computers, or in their textbooks or other assigned readings. Advocating on behalf of a trans or non-binary child or youth can be highly effective. When you advocate on behalf of a child or youth who has faced violence or discrimination, you clearly communicate to them that they have worth in your eyes. A similar effect happens when you require other adults to respect the youth's gender identity. When you advocate for systemic policy changes, you not only positively impact the trans or non-binary youth you know, but all the ones you don't know who will benefit from seeing people value them. And that's true even if the policy change is opposed. There are many excellent resources for trans and non-binary youth on the internet. To check if the youth you are working with have an LGBT community center in their area, check the first website listed on this slide, which is Centerlink. If there is one, they will be able to connect you and/or the youth to many relevant programs. The next two URLs on the slide are resource collections curated by respected agencies. As we discussed earlier, most parents don't know how to respond to a trans or non-binary child, and may inadvertently communicate rejection to their child, setting that child up for a number of risk factors. So if you know of a trans or non-binary youth, see if you can connect their parents to some helpful resources. While there are many, we've only listed two here. One is the Family Acceptance Project that we've mentioned before. The second URL is for a lengthy resource list put together by the Movement Advancement Project. This one includes a number of culturally specific resources for parents of various racial and religious groups. Another crucial service you can offer the parents of a trans or non-binary youth is simply providing a non-judgmental listening ear. Parents and families often feel both isolated and inadequate when their child comes out. The U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration notes that research and intervention work has found that few parents and caregivers have had the opportunity to talk about their experiences, concerns, and hopes for their LGBT child with a supportive, non-judgmental professional. By the way, Forge believes a non-judgmental peer is better than not having anyone to talk to. Continuing what Samsa said, parents and caregivers also need to express their anxieties and fears about how others might treat or hurt their LGBT child. This step is critical to building an alliance and to understanding their perspective. There are also things you can do whether or not you know an individual trans or non-binary youth. First, make your support visible because you never know who is watching. The note on the screen went viral on the internet. It says, "Neighbor, thank you for having a trans flag waving in your yard. I am a 15-year-old trans boy living in an unsupportive household. But every time I see your flag, I feel better. I appreciate your existence and pride." Beside flags, some other ways you can silently communicate support include bumper stickers, rainbow stickers, and safe space signs, t-shirts, and pro-trans buttons. Another low effort supportive action you can take is to post or repost trans content on any social media you control. There is even a social media toolkit specifically prepared to support LGBTQ youth with everything already prepared for you to make it virtually effortless. This kit was prepared by Forge in conjunction with the National Resource Center for Reaching Victims, funded by the Office for Victims of Crime. There is also a white paper on the Resource Center's webpage that covers some of the same ground that this webinar has covered. Everyone can help by talking trans. What we mean by that is looking for and taking opportunities to bring transgender or non-binary topics into a discussion. Transgender people are stigmatized, and so is discussion about us. Help us break the stigma. Such discussions, if they are overheard by a trans or non-binary kid, can be extremely important to them. If you are part of a service organization, make sure you figure out a way to at least mention trans and non-binary people. Not only will this tell trans and non-binary youth that your agency is an ally to them, but it also, again, helps us diminish the stigma, making trans people just one more flavor of who we humans are. By the way, the document you see on this slide is about making puberty and health education programs inclusive of trans and non-binary students. However, we would recommend it to anyone doing public education work of any kind because it's got some really great, concrete, and practical ideas in it. You can Google gender spectrum to find it. At this point, we'd like to close by sharing one of our favorite videos about affirming trans kids. We'd like to thank you for listening to this webinar. If you have questions, you can send them to us by email. My email is Laurie, C as in Cook, D as in Daniels, @forge-forward.org. And Michael can be reached at mmunson, that's MUNSON, @forge-forward.org. We thank you for your interest and for being with us today.